Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
And welcome, everyone, to the Sports Spectrum Podcast. This is episode number 13, and my name is Jason Romano. It's great to have you here today on the program. Our guest is one of my favorites. It's really cool when you can bring in a guest who you're actually friends with and you have a relationship with. And John Gordon is a renowned speaker and author. He has authored 17 different books. His most famous, probably The Energy Bus. He also has a brand new book out that he just released called The Power of Positive Leadership. John has been a huge mentor and friend of mine, a huge resource, and just a tremendous wealth of knowledge and information in helping me grow in my career as a man and in my business and as a man of faith. I think you're going to really enjoy his story of faith, and he's got connections all over the sports landscape. He has relationships with Dabo Swinney, the Clemson head coach, national champion, Clemson Tigers, Clint Hurdle of the Pirates, relationships with Mike Smith, the former Falcons head coach. He even wrote and co-authored a book with him. Mark Richt of the University of Miami, the Dodgers, and manager Dave Roberts. He's so connected within the sports world, and it's his simple message of leadership, servant leadership, that has resonated and really made a dent around the sports world. So we're grateful for John Gordon. I do hope you enjoy this podcast. Here is episode number 12 with John Gordon. John, welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast. How are you?
Jason, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so good to talk to you, my friend. And the first area I want to go in, and just as I'm doing my research, obviously we're friends as well, but I really wanted to kind of dig deep into your story. And I see 17 books written in 13 years. To me, that's insane. And I love it because I've read almost all of your books and they're all amazing. And the quality is there and the quantity obviously is happening. How do you do that? How does one write that many books in that short a time?
Well, thanks for saying that. I mean, in terms of writing, I write simply. My books are fables, so I think they're a little bit easier to write than these big, complex books and how-to textbooks and so forth. So I think that's one thing. Also, I write every December. So every December, I'll write a book because that's when things slow down with speaking. It's when just the world seems to slow down. And I take about 3.5 weeks, and I'll usually write a book in that amount of time. And then during the year, another book might come up, but it's not something I usually plan, but another book might happen. Like, for instance, You Win in the Locker Room First with Mike Smith. That was an unplanned book. After he was fired, he came to me and said, "Hey, I want to write a book, John." That was the only time period I had, so we did it then. So again, during the year, different books will come up like that.
3 weeks. There must be authors listening right now who are like, that must be nice. 3 weeks, you write an entire book.
I have to give God all the credit. God gets all the glory because God will give me a vision. He'll give me the idea. I take a walk of prayer in the morning, get more ideas. I start writing. I'm usually done about noon. In the evening, I'll edit what I wrote and then get some new fresh ideas, wake up, do the same again. But it's really this walk of prayer, getting ideas, God giving me this story, and then it just unfolding. And people often ask me, Jason, it's funny. They say, "John, do you have a ghostwriter?" Because, again, I get asked that all the time. I must not look smart enough to write a book.
Right.
But I say, no, I have a Holy Ghost writer because God is really the inspiration behind every book I write.
That's tremendous. We're talking to John Gordon here on the Sports Spectrum Podcast. John, let's go back. You say you take a prayer walk in the morning. Is that something you only do when you're writing, or is that something you kind of have on a regular basis? And I want to let's take us inside what that entails. What exactly is a prayer walk? Describe what that is.
Well, that started years ago when my wife and I were fighting a lot. I was miserable. I was negative, and she almost left me. And so I knew I needed to change. And so I started these thank you walks each day. I called them a thank you walk, where I would just practice gratitude because I did all this research on gratitude and found that you can't be stressed and thankful at the same time. If you're feeling blessed, you won't be stressed. And so every day I would start saying like these thank yous while I was walking out loud. And then that turned into prayer. So it was gratitude, then prayer. And as my faith evolved, more prayer. So it really became a habit of a daily walk of gratitude and prayer to get my mind right, my spirit right, and just to get focused on what matters most.
Now, let's talk about the John Gordon before he was an author and what I will say, world-renowned speaker. But what was that? What was the dream for the young John Gordon? Growing up through middle school, high school, what was that like? What did you want to do when you were a kid?
I was an athlete. Played all sports, played lacrosse in college, went to Cornell University, and I would say my dream was really politics. I wanted to be in Congress or maybe a governor or something like that. I studied political science in college. I was ready to go to law school. I actually interned in Washington, D.C. for a congresswoman, and I even ran for city council of Atlanta when I was 26 years old. I walked door to door to 7,000 houses. I lost the election. It was devastating at the time. Now I realize you have to lose a goal to find your destiny, but at the time it was tough. But that was really my dream, was politics.
Wow, politics. So you get to college, you get through, and you go into politics and that type of thing, but then you end up in the restaurant business. Am I right? Tell me about restaurant, what that was like.
Yes, I never expected to go in the restaurant business. I graduated Cornell, made my way to Atlanta after college, just decided, hey, I'm going to move down there, and just packed up my stuff, went down with a friend, got an apartment, started waiting tables, got a job bartending in Buckhead. It was a random way I got that job. I got a tryout, never bartended before in my life. Never forget my mom walking in and visiting me with my dad, and I'm literally standing on the bar pouring shots in people's mouths. It was one of those kind of bars. I'm not proud of that moment now, but
I can imagine.
Yeah, 24 years old. She's probably thinking, like, what has happened to my son? He goes to Cornell. He was supposed to be in law school, and now he's bartending.
Putting that education to good use.
Exactly. I was getting my master's in teaching at the time at Emory while I was bartending, and then eventually said, I'm going to open up my own place, because all these people started to come see me. And one day I'm on the side of the road. The owner of the place next door to me was standing right there. I said, hey, Richard, would you ever sell your place? He said, everything's for sale. Got a few people together, invested money, bought this place. It was called Park Bench, after the Park Bench in Stony Brook where I grew up. Called it Park Bench, and opened up a bar, restaurant in Buckhead. And it became a real big hit. And that got me into the restaurant business of really learning how to market, how to promote. And again, I didn't know anything about restaurants, but for some reason I was really good at marketing. And I would just get a lot of people to come there, and it became a successful place. And I was 24 years old when that happened. So I owned a bar in Buckhead at 24. And I met my wife 3 weeks after the restaurant bar opened. So I never got to enjoy the single life of being a bar owner, but that's probably a good thing. But met my wife as she was walking down the street.
Now, John, you write in your book, The Power of Positive Leadership, that just came out now, that you had this moment where you knew you were meant to become an author and speaker, and you completely began a different stage of life from the restaurant business. Take us back, walk us through that process, because so many of us have jobs, I think, that we don't enjoy, and we want to take sort of a leap of faith, but fear creeps in and prevents them from taking that first step. Tell us about that time when you took that step.
Well, I had these restaurants in Atlanta, and then eventually sold them back to my partners. That's a long story, but we then moved to Jacksonville. So my wife and I are in Jacksonville. I was at that point working for a .com company. Thought I was going to make my billions at this .com. But then the .com started to crash. It was during the .com crash, and it was just a really tough time. So I lose my job. And this was around the same time that I was asking, okay, what am I born to do? Why am I here? I know I'm here for a reason. This is when I was really miserable, fearful, unhappy, and scared. And that's when writing and speaking came to me. I mean, literally, I said, God, why am I here? God, I know I'm here for a reason. And God just showed me writing and speaking. And I never really did it before, but I knew that's what I was meant to do. So that began the journey of saying, okay, I'm going to write and speak, but I still have to provide for my family. So what I did was I opened up a few Moe's Southwest Grills in Jacksonville. I say few, but it started with one where I second mortgaged my home, $20,000 in credit cards, put everything we had into this Moe's, the scariest time of my life, the most fearful time of my life, but also where my faith was born, because I just saw how God carried, my wife and I and our young family during that time. Because if that restaurant didn't make it, we were done. We would have lost everything. I don't know what we would have done after that. So I didn't really just leave my job. I was forced to leave my job because I was, fired. But that led to a new beginning and opening the restaurant, the Moe's, and then beginning this writing and speaking career.
We're talking to John Gordon here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Now, you mentioned God quite a bit. Obviously, you're a man of faith, John. I want to talk about where that started for you and your faith. How did that journey begin?
Yeah, I wasn't always, a man of faith. I grew up in a family that never went to church or temple. My mom was Jewish. My dad who raised me was a New York City police officer, Italian and Catholic, but, never went to church. So we celebrated the holidays, but never really meant anything spiritually or religiously. And then in my 20s, I was a seeker. I would say I was a reader of New Age material, of a lot of Buddhist texts and Buddhist books. And I was really just seeking God in many ways. Very spiritual, I'd say. I mean, I prayed, but didn't really have a relationship with God. And then when my life started to fall apart, that's when spiritually things just started to change. I listened to a few sermons from Erwin McManus. A good friend of mine gave me these sermons. And one was called Why I Follow Jesus. And just spoke to me. I mean, spoke to my heart. I'll never forget listening to them going, wow, maybe there is something to this Jesus. I think there might be something to this Jesus. It was just so powerful. Also, Rob Bell did a sermon called Covered in Dust about Jesus as a Jewish rabbi. And that really spoke to me as well. So in my prayer, I said, okay, if there is something to this Jesus, God, I'm open. Just show me the signs. And God started showing me the signs. He literally showed me the signs on I-4. As I drove to Orlando all the time, I would see these signs that says Jesus is the answer. I mean, it was wild. I'd be looking to the left and I would hear, look, I turned to the right and I would see the sign. I was a meditator, so I would meditate, and I started to see a glowing cross in my meditations. It was just wild. And that began my journey of faith, of just being open and just eventually receiving. And I was baptized in 2006. And people often ask me about my faith, and it's really just been a journey, but it's one where I had an encounter with God. I experienced firsthand God carrying me, God rescuing me, God saving me, and then forming me from the inside out. Like John Gordon now is much different than the John Gordon then. It just changed me from the inside out of who I am now. And I've seen how God has molded me and changed me in my life.
Was it an immediate transformation for you, John, or was it something that, because in my case, as I became a believer, I was 26, 27 years old, it was a gradual process. It took me about a year to really understand the decision that I had made in putting my faith in Christ. Did that, for you, was that immediate? Did you just get it, or did it take a little while?
It took a little while. It was more of a understanding. I would say something happened of a shift. I'm sure it happened to you. You had a little bit of a shift, no doubt. But I would often pray, God, strengthen my faith, because I don't know all the answers. I don't understand it all, but just strengthen my faith. And that even was wild, because different people started to show up in my life, friends that I never had before, strong, great men of faith. And then books people would send me out of the blue. And then I would find the book and I would read that. I read Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. I read a lot of Max Lucado books. Andy Stanley gave a sermon and talking about, the facts behind Jesus. And it was just really a very cool journey of growing gradually. And as my faith matured, I would say I matured in many ways.
So you mentioned books. In 2007, you authored the book, The Energy Bus. And it's a fantastic book and has impacted a ton of people and has obviously changed your life in so many ways. Tell me about how the idea for the Energy Bus came about, and then we'll get into some of the impact that that's had into the sports world.
So I basically, at that moment, I lost my job, right? I opened up these restaurants. I know I want to write and speak. I now have the restaurants going. I'm doing a little speaking, but it's not going great. But I got a clear sign after about 3 or 4 years of opening the restaurants to sell the restaurants. It was time to just focus on writing and speaking 100%. I remember telling my wife, I saw the sign, I'm supposed to sell. She's like, no, we can't. I'm like, no, I'm telling you. She goes, what happens if it doesn't work? I said, there are no other options. Like, we have to do this. God gave me a sign. And the sign was I was out to Oregon going to speak in Portland, Oregon, flying all the way there. And on my way, I was reading a magazine and it said, how to know when to sell your business. And on the way back, I'm reading a completely different business magazine. And there's another article that said, how to value your business when selling. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
I walked in the door. I said, okay, it's time. And I mean, I just knew it was a sign. Like, I really listen, I see things, and then I just obey. And so basically did that, sold. And now 6 months later, nothing's going well. The writing and speaking is not going well. I'm not having a lot of gigs. I had enough money probably to survive for another year and a half after selling the restaurant. So now that year and a half comes very quickly. So I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? Maybe I should give up. And on this walk of gratitude and prayer, the idea for the energy bus came to me. I went home to my home office. I went upstairs where it was, and I started to write this book and wrote it in 3.5 weeks. It was one of those spiritual experiences of my life, writing that book. And when I was done, I thought I had something that would make a difference. I mean, I wrote it to inspire, but it was also in many ways my story of a guy going from negative to positive, and a guy who has to learn to find his optimism, his belief, his faith on his journey to get his team on the bus and moving in the right direction with a shared vision, focus, and purpose. So it's about him becoming positive and then helping his team become positive, and then together accomplishing success. So for me, it was autobiographical in many ways, but then it was rejected by all these publishers when we sent it out. So that was very disheartening.
I can't imagine being rejected. Like you're so passionate, so excited. You know you got something here. You know you're hearing from the Lord, and then rejection. Tell me when the book gets published, how you got to that point when the book was actually, okay, here we go. It's published time.
Right. I saw God's hand in all of it looking back, but at the time, you don't realize the hand on it, right? You're like, what is going on? Come on, God, I sold the restaurants. Like, why isn't this happening? It was such a walk of faith when I look back. So it gets rejected. And I remember I was in Barnes & Noble looking at all these books on the shelf, and I saw John Wiley & Sons, for one of Patrick Lencioni's books. And I realized that we hadn't sent it to Wiley yet. I said, we should send it to Wiley. So I called my agent. She sent it to Wiley. She actually sent it to the health editor. It should have went to the business editor. She sent it to the wrong person. But somehow it got on the desk of the business editor. He looked at it, gave it to his assistant. She'd only been on the job for 3 months. He said, I'm not a real big fan of this, but take a look. Maybe you want to do it. She decides she wants to do it. He says, if it doesn't go well, it could be your career. She wants to take the chance. And so I remember getting the call that it was going to be published by Wiley. They said, we don't have a lot of money. I said, I don't really care, but we can get out in 6 months. And I really wanted that book out because I was so excited about the message. And I felt it was a message that I could take to businesses, to companies, to schools, to sports teams, and share a message like that. But honestly, I wasn't even thinking about sports teams a lot at the time. I just wanted to get it out there. And it got published. And I'll never forget when it came out, not one bookstore in the United States would carry the book. But it became this huge hit in Korea. South Korea, not North Korea, but South Korea.
Okay.
One of the largest foreign rights deal John Wiley has ever done is the energy bus. Actually, the largest rights they've ever done, foreign right. There was a bidding war for it. No one could explain why. What happened? God's hand became a top 5 bestseller in Korea, sold several 100,000 copies, like very quickly in South Korea. And I would have people email me from South Korea. And yet now one bookstore in the United States is carrying the book. So my publisher was calling me the David Hasselhoff of Korea, making fun of me because I'm like huge in Korea, but not big in the United States. And that's when I went on a 28-city tour, paid for by myself. The publisher, wouldn't support it. And I went from city to city just sharing the message in the book, like 5 people in one city, 10 people in another. Daniel Decker, who you know Daniel.
Yes.
Daniel literally was selling indoor advertising, and we met through my Moe's Southwest Grill because he was selling me indoor advertising to my Moe's Southwest Grill. And that's how we met. And he was really intrigued by what I was doing now as starting to write and speak. He said, I'd love to help you with that sometime. And so when I went on this tour, I reached out to him. I said, hey, you want to help me on this tour? He said, yes, we agreed. And now Daniel's known as one of the, the gurus of book marketing in the industry. He works with Tony Robbins and all these people. It's so funny that's how we started the restaurant, indoor advertising. And now, we're both doing that. But he would basically call all these radio stations, TV stations, like, hey, John Gordon's coming. Yes, he's internationally known.
Which is true. Korea is not in the United States.
No, I was internationally known. So we got a bunch of TV and radio shows, But, no, at the events, 5, 10 people showed up. So it wasn't very successful in doing it that way. But I look back and people I met on that tour led to relationships, led to speaking engagements at schools, small businesses. It really got me started. So I learned that when you're faithful with the small things and you're willing to step out in faith. And the reason why I stepped out and decided to do this, because God sort of put that idea in my head. So I said, all right, I'm doing it. I'm just going to be bold. And when you are faithful with the small things, God will bring you to bigger things.
Now, how is your wife dealing with all this? Like, I'm just imagining if this were me and I write a book and I decide, honey, I'm going to go on a 30-day tour. I'll see you later. And nothing's guaranteed. And I'm paying for it out of my own pocket. Like, how's that family dynamic working for you?
Okay, you're with the right person when they give you strength. And I got to say, the one thing about my wife is she's fearless. And she kept on saying, let's go for it. But the funny thing is, I drove cross country to Los Angeles and started from there working my way back. So I drive cross country. They fly out to meet me. They were going to come with me to like 4 or 5 cities. After the first city, she's like, all right, we're going home. Because we had young children. It was like, okay, this is not really going to work. So they fly home. I now go for 3 weeks pretty much on my own from city to city. Had one guy who was an intern at the University of Florida, Jim Van Allen. He's actually one of our facilitators to this day for us, one of our top trainers. He came with me and drove the bus. I actually got sick in about 2 or 3 cities. He drove when I was sick, and we went to some of these cities. And it turned out to be, a really cool time. But yeah, my wife was just very supportive. We had 2 young children. She's like, hey, go for it. This is your dream. This is, what you're born to do. You got to go share this message. I mean, we were both on board. Like, we're here to share this message. We're here to do this work. It wasn't really, about me. It was like, one, it was about me doing what I was born to do. But it was really also about going out there and making a difference from city to city. And that's what we were trying to do. And so she was really supportive of that.
We're talking to John Gordon here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. He is the author of many books, including The Energy Bus, and his latest, The Power of Positive Leadership. We'll talk about that in a moment. I want to talk about the intersection into the sports world. You touched on it just a little bit there, John. In 2007, The Energy Bus comes out, and suddenly you're intersected into this world of sports. And I'm not just talking about like high school sports or even low D1 or even D2 or D3. We're talking about the NFL. So tell me the story of the first team that reaches out to you and invites you to come and share the Energy Bus with them.
Well, Mike Ryan was a trainer for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he is now one of the athletic trainer and analysts for NBC, football on Sunday Night Football. So Mike was a trainer for the Jaguars, and I gave him a copy of the book when it came out. He gave it to Coach Mike Smith, who was the defensive coordinator at the time for the Jaguars. Mike and I don't even know each other. Mike gave it to Jack Del Rio and said, hey, Jack, I think you might like this book. So Jack read the book, 2007, coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The year before wasn't great. He read the book, and I get a call from Jack out of the blue on my phone. I'll never forget. And saying that, hey, would you come meet with me? So I went down and meet with him. Again, I think I'm 35 years old. This book just came out. I'm an unknown author. Never spoken to a sports team before. And I'm going to meet with Jack Del Rio, a legend, a guy that I've always admired as a player, now as a coach. And I'm sitting across from him, and he starts telling me how the book really resonated with him and how the idea of energy vampires and negativity, and how he realized that he had to be more positive than the negativity he was facing, and how he had to get his team on the bus. And he said, hey, would you come speak to the team? I said, I'd love to. I said, but I'll come speak if you give every guy a copy of the book, because I think they'll benefit from reading it. And I don't know why I said that. I was just bold and just said it. He said, you got it. And so he gave every guy in the organization a book, not just the players, but the coaches, the trainers, the janitors. He gave them a book as well. He gave it to everyone in the organization to all get on the bus. And they had a great season that year, 11-5, beat the Steelers in the first round of the playoffs. And when Mike Smith became the coach of the Falcons the following year in 2008, he called me up and said, hey, John, love for you to work with our team this year. We're going to do the Energy Bus this year. And so that began my journey in sports. And then after that, the Texas Longhorns heard about it. Someone had a friend on the coaching staff. So I worked with Texas the year Colt McCoy was a senior. They went to the national championship. He got injured, but we did the Energy Bus that year. and then University of Georgia after that, and Mark Richt. So it just began this journey of all these teams and coaches starting to use it. Then it started to spread to all these other sports.
Are you kind of pinching yourself a little bit as this is happening and saying, how am I, John Gordon, sitting across, like you said, from Jack Del Rio, but from Mike Smith, from people like Dabo Sweeney and Clint Hurdle, like all these people? Do you kind of pinch yourself and be like, what am I doing here?
So the first few years, it felt that way for probably for 4 or 5 years. Now I feel like, okay, I know what I need to do to help these teams.
Right.
I know what these coaches need. I know what to share. So now it's more like I can see God's hand, how he brought me from the very beginning. But yeah, when I first went to speak to the Jaguars and I see Maurice Jones-Drew, who, by the way, inspired, the character in training camp. And when I see these guys who I watch on TV and for the first time going to speak to them, it was surreal. It was intimidating. But at the same time, I remember just telling myself, just be bold and share the message. Just be bold and share the message. And it resonated, and almost having to feel like, make yourself believe you belong for some reason. I don't even know where the courage came from at the time, but it did. And I'd say after maybe 4 or 5 years, okay, then it started to feel like I belong. But yes, in the beginning, it was very surreal. How did I get to this? That was what I kept on saying. Like, God, only you could do this. That's what I want people to know. Like, it's not me. It is God. And when you are doing his work and you listen to him and you obey him, he will do what you're meant to do. I say God is my speaker bureau. He puts me where I'm supposed to be. And some events I don't get, but some events I do. So I go where I'm supposed to go, and I know it's his hand. And so I'm really just sort of going where he's meant to bring me. I'm meant to go.
That's awesome. I love it. We're talking to John Gordon here. John is the author of his latest book, The Power of Positive Leadership, many, many other books he's written too, including The Energy Bus and others. I want to talk about one specific sports relationship you have, and that's with Dabo Sweeney. In the new book, The Power of Positive Leadership, you mentioned Coach Sweeney and, just your relationship with him. You've had some really cool opportunities to not just pour into his life, into his team's life, but also kind of experience this journey with him as he's elevated his team all the way up to the national championship this past January. Talk about the relationship you have with Dabo.
It's been one of the most special and rewarding things that's ever happened in my life, to be honest, just that journey. And again, that was God's hand as well, because in 2011, he had the entire team read training camp, and he shared the 11 characteristics with the team. Every week, he would go over one of the traits of what the best do better. And that happened because Chad Morris, while he was at Tulsa, was in a bookstore looking around for a book and saw training camp on the shelf and the whistle and a fable about excellence. He thought, football book, I'll read this. So he brought the book and read it. We don't even know each other. He reads the book while he's at Tulsa, gets hired by Dabo at Clemson, gives Dabo the book, Dabo reads it, and then they start to use it. Now, every time in 2011 I turned on the TV to watch some football, it seemed like Clemson was on. I never liked Clemson, never rooted for Clemson, but now I'm watching Clemson's games. I have no idea they're using my book that year, but here I am watching this team going, wow, I like these guys. Love that coach, love his energy, love Taj Boyd, love the spirit of this team. I was drawn to him. Dwayne Allen was the tight end at the time. Just love those guys. And at the end of the year, I'll never forget, Chad DMs me on Twitter. And he said, hey, we've been using your book all year. Would you ever come speak to our team during training camp? I'm like, are you kidding me? I've been watching your team all year. I love you guys.
Wow.
Of course. So you could just see how God's hand was on that. So then I go in 2012 to speak to the team. Dabo and I had a conversation beforehand. I said, hey, have you ever heard of the Energy Bus? He goes, no, I never heard of the Energy Bus. We did training camp. I said, oh, check it out. I said, you are the Energy Bus. And so he read it, shared it with the team that year in 2012, and then been working with the team ever since. And it's just been an incredible relationship because you're right. I've seen how he has taken that team from contender to through belief and optimism and so much faith and just standing by his principles and the way he leads, one of the most incredible leaders on the planet. And I've watched as he's built that team and watched their success. And being there and being a part of it, and then being at the national championship and being on the field with those guys was just an incredible moment.
We had Hunter Renfrow on. He's the wide receiver that caught the game-winning touchdown in the game Clemson won over Alabama to win the national championship back in January in Tampa. And Hunter I kept asking him about Coach Sweeney, and he just kept saying he's a tremendous man, he's a tremendous leader, and he cares about his players. Is that what it makes Coach Sweeney just not only an amazing man, but also an amazing coach and leader? Is that what it is? Is it that simple of a philosophy?
I think it's the fact that he is a genuine person who truly loves his players, but his keys are that he has love and accountability. He leads with both of those things. So a lot of coaches, share a lot of love, but not enough accountability sometimes. And sometimes they share too much accountability and not enough love. For him, it's like this right combination. He has the perfect blend of loving his players, but you know what? He's going to challenge you to be your best. He's here to make you great. And if you're not striving to be your best, he's going to push you. And so you don't have a choice. Like, because I love you, I'm going to help you become the best you can be. And so it's that love, but then drive for excellence. And when I was writing The Power of Positive Leadership, I kept on thinking about him because he really embodies almost everything I wrote about in that book from that love and accountability standpoint. So yeah, genuine person, builds great relationship. And then here's the other thing. He talks about building a family culture. Well, a lot of people say we're a family. No, Clemson really is a family. When you go to their practices, they have kids on the sidelines just hanging out, playing. They have wives watching practice on the sidelines. Once a week on a Wednesday night, they all eat as a staff, and their families come as well. You go to the hotels, the coaches are there with their families. So it's not like this, hey, we have to hunker down, get everyone away. The families are a huge part of their program. And that's just an expression of who Dabo is and the family he has built. So they built such a family culture because that's the kind of person Dabo is. And then, again, he believes in everybody. He gives you a chance. He holds you to a higher standard, but you know what? He just makes you believe you can accomplish it. I'll never forget before the North Carolina game 2 years ago, ACC championship, I said, hey, I'm a little worried about this team. They seem really strong. He said, John, it's all good. We're going to play our best game. The best seize the moment. And I just cracked up because he used one of my quotes to make me feel better about a game they were playing in.
That's great.
That's his optimism. I'm supposed to be the positive guy, and here he is. I've never met anyone with more positivity, more optimism. He makes me want to be more positive.
Your book, The Energy Bus, has obviously taken off in terms of the opportunities that you've had to speak and to share with different coaches in sports. So I'm just going to name a couple of names here. I want you to just tell stories based upon these names from the book and from different areas that I've read about you. Let's start with Clint Hurdle. He's the manager of the Pirates.
Yeah, Clint read my book, so then he reached out, and then I started to speak to his teams during spring training. Just an amazing guy who just loves his players. Big guy with a lot of love, and you just love Clint Hurdle.
Mark Richt, he's now the head coach of University of Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah, when Mark was at University of Georgia, he and Mike Smith were at a clinic, and Mike told him about the energy bus. So Mark reached out, and we had a great conversation, told him how to roll it out, and he rolled out the energy bus like no other coach I've ever met. And we did a one-word thing, too, where he had the players pick a word for the season, and then they had their words scrolling throughout the screens throughout the facilities. So we did the one word, had them read the energy bus, even tested them on the book. I spoke to the team. They lose the first 2 games after I spoke. I sent Coach a text. I said, Coach, I still believe in you guys. He sent me a text back. John, the guys are staying positive. They're still on the bus. In years past, we've allowed energy vampires to sabotage our team, but not this year. This year, we won't allow it. In their big meeting room, they put a huge picture of an energy vampire on the wall. And anytime one of the players was being a vampire, they took the player's picture and they put it on the wall. No one wanted to be on the wall. And they went on to win the next 10 games in a row, making it to the SEC championship that year. That was a really special season watching that team. Looking back, I remember having a conversation with Coach, and he said, yeah, different guys came into his office and said, Coach, I'm not going to be a vampire. I'm going to be a contributor to this team. Several guys I keep in touch with to this day. Guys said it was the defining moment in their life that They weren't going to be negative. They were going to really look at life in a positive way. Now they're thriving, some in the NFL, some in the business world now. It's been really cool to watch those guys and see what Coach Rick did with that team. But I'll never forget, I asked Coach, I said, Coach, if this doesn't work, what are you going to do? Because he was really on the hot seat. He said, John, if God wants me to coach kids at another university on another team, then that's where I'll go. I'm going to go wherever God wants me to be, and I'll coach whatever kids I'm supposed to coach. I remember just being just so surprised and so just admiring of his faith. So that was Coach Rick.
Yeah, and he's doing amazing things now, sharing, not only impacting people, but impacting a football program at the University of Miami. Last name for
Jason, I want you to know, Jason, I mean, here I'm talking about like all these teams that win,
Yeah.
But I want people to know that not every team I work with wins. I've learned that some coaches will give their team, say, the book, but they don't reinforce it. And what I've learned is that it's never about me or the book. What I've learned in working with all these teams, that it's really about the leader. It's about the leader and the coaches and that team and how they lead and how they really come together and maintain the principles throughout the season. Do they really believe them? Do they really stick to them? And do they really have the grit to move forward and the faith to keep on pushing? That's really the key.
And sometimes, just because you don't win on the field, maybe you're just not the most talented, but man, your life was changed and you grow as a family and a culture and everything starts to really just come. It can still be effective even if you're not going 14-0 and winning the national championship, right?
Exactly. And that's what I learned also. Early on when I first was speaking, I thought, how cool is this? Okay, I'm going to help this team win. And to me, it was about winning. And now what I realize is whenever I have an opportunity to go speak to a team, it's so much more than that. Now it's like, no, I want to go and I want to hopefully make a difference in those players' lives and have an impact on those players and those coaches. And if I do that and winning happens, great. But if we also impact their lives, that's what matters most.
All right, last name from the sports world, Dave Roberts, Dodgers manager.
Oh, I love Dave Roberts. Went to go speak to the Dodgers for the first time 2 years ago when he was, a new manager. And we did win in the locker room with the team, the 7 C's to build a winning team. And, that was a blast just getting to work with that team, sharing the 7 C's. And that was really exciting to watch him lead that team that year, to keep that team connected because they were below 500. They had some problems. They had tons of injuries. Kershaw gets hurt, but they just stayed connected. They stayed the course. And I always talk about to teams and leaders, hey, if you stay connected, you will be committed because you will never have commitment without connection. So being a connected team is the key in the NFL, the NBA, at high school level, you name it. You have to become a connected team if you want to become a successful team. And the great thing about becoming a connected team is that's where relationships are developed. And those relationships drive everything in the future. Coach Calipari and I were talking the other day about, relationships and how, I saw us 30 for 30. And Coach Calipari loves his players and his players love him. People can say what they want, but people who know him, and I know a lot of people who know him, know the real him, man, like just an amazing guy who loves his players. And that's what it's about. And Dave Roberts is all about that. So the cool thing about Dave Roberts is I was in his office the day before they clinched the postseason. And one of his players walks in, and Dave gets up and gives the player a big bear hug. It was like a 5-second bear hug, a kind of hug you would give a long-lost son. And the player walked out. I said, Dave, what's up with that? He said he comes in each day, and I go give him a hug. And we talk about life. He comes in 2 or 3 times a day. And that player has thrived because of Dave's love. And I saw the impact that a coach has on a player when that player invests in a relationship with that player and how that player thrives because of a coach.
You mentioned love and relationships. One of my favorite books of yours, maybe my favorite, is The Carpenter. And whenever I've had the opportunity to speak, I've shared many of the principles I've learned from you and from this book. And I highly recommend it, by the way, for people to read it, The Carpenter. But the success model that is taught in this book, it changed my life. It really did. Can you share that simple success model with our listeners?
It's such a simple model. It's to love, serve, and care. And that as a leader, as a team member, as someone who works in business, as someone who works in a school, every day you just show up and you say, okay, how can I love others? How can I serve them and be of service? And how can I show that I care? So I always say, don't focus on growing your business. Focus on loving and serving and caring, and your business will exponentially grow. As a coach, just focus on loving, serving, and caring your players. If you invest in them and you develop relationships with them and you help them become the best that they can be, they will help the team become the best that you all can be. And that's the key. It's like, let's get rid of the clutter. Let's focus on what matters most. And if you love serving care, great things happen.
So true. Now, I've had many bosses who have loved and cared for me, and they've had have impacted me on my life. And then I've had bosses that were locked in on achievement in the workplace, completely neglecting the relationship aspect of the organization, of the people. It was all about the work, 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 work. Why is it so hard for so many leaders to just simply love, serve, and care for the people that they work with?
I think in many ways they're fear-based. And when you're fear-based, you're going to be focusing on the outside. You're going to focus on the outcomes, the numbers. You're going to focus on the fruit of the tree. But when you're love-based, you focus on the root of the tree. You nourish that root. You invest in it. And when you invest in that root, you know that you get a great supply of fruit. But fear causes people to focus on things that are urgent rather than what matters. They focus on the things that are just that you can quantify, and the numbers and the wins. And I think a lot of people, they're leading that way. So it becomes about their own self-preservation. It becomes about their own survival and how they can be exalted, how they can be successful. When really, we know through great leadership, the model of Jesus and every other great leader, that when you really put others first and you invest in others and you become a servant leader, that's what leads to true success. So it's ironic, right? What looks powerful isn't, and maybe what looks weaker is what really is about power, is really powerful.
It's so true. And I've lived that. I've seen it on both ends. And I can't echo what you just said enough. Now, I want to talk about your latest book, The Power of Positive Leadership. On the back, it says, discover the proven principles and practices that make great leaders great. I've read it. It's really a fantastic book. But some people hear the word positive and they think, Stuart Smalley on SNL. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. And doggone it, people like me. But that's not the positivity that we're talking about here, John, right?
No. We're moving positive thinking out of the realm of self-deception and denial and fake to like real positivity. When you look at history and you look at the Dabo Sweeneys of the world and you look at Alan Mulally, who turned around Ford, who defines his leadership style as positive leadership. You look at these leaders, you realize that pessimists don't change the world. Complainers talk about problems, but they don't solve them. I often say critics write words, but they don't write the future. Critics don't create anything. So it's the positive leaders, it's the optimists, it's the dreamers, it's the doers, it's the people who believe in a brighter and better future that then take the actions necessary to create it. So this is a framework for leadership. I call it positive leadership because it is driven by optimism. It's driven by love. It's driven by relationships. It's driven by connecting people. It's driven by encouragement rather than discouragement. So there's all this research also in science that we have now that supports this, and history and case studies. So I'm sharing personal examples, research, stories that really just make the case for becoming a positive leader, and then giving a framework on how anyone could do it. And I've been really excited about the feedback in terms of what people are getting out of it, because it's everything I've learned since writing the Energy Bus, working with all these teams, what I learned from these leaders. And I consider myself a student first. So it's what I'm learning and now sharing with others so they can grow.
We will place a link to buy this book, and I can't recommend it enough for everybody. In our show notes, sportspectrum.com is where you'll find that. So definitely check it out. And all of John's books have been, like I said, amazing and very impactful in my life. In this book, sort of, John, is a lot, you mentioned it, but really, I see so many different principles in the book from all of your other books. It's almost like the fables that you've told over the years through trying to get your message across have come to fruition in this book. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, fair to say. It's almost like a collection of my thoughts, lessons I've learned, beliefs, and books I've written. So it's into one sort of how-to package. It's not a fable, so I've written many fables, but this was a book that I wanted to write after You Win in the Locker Room. Mike and I wrote in a different style than a fable. We wrote a how-to book, 7 C's to Build a Winning Team. So this was sort of a follow-up to that. And the next one I'm working on is The Power of a Positive Team, where I'm going to write the same way as The Power of Positive Leadership, but I'm going to write it in such a way that teams could read it together and have a framework for great teamwork that they can all be on the same page together with.
Can't wait to read that as well. This is John Gordon. A couple more questions, John, for you here on the podcast. How do you balance all this? As a dad, I've been kind of doing a little more speaking, and I left ESPN, sort of stepped out and doing my own thing. Writing a book, in my process of writing a book is not 3.5 weeks, by the way. So this has been a journey for myself. But how do you balance all of it? The traveling, the speaking, the writing, still giving your best to God and obviously to your marriage and even more importantly to your children as a dad. Just how do you balance it all?
I think there were times I've fallen short, to be honest. I mean, I look back and I wasn't spending enough time with my kids. I remember my daughter was a sophomore in high school. My son was 8th grade, and they were struggling in school. My wife was struggling with my son. They were butting heads. My daughter wasn't doing well. And I made a commitment at that point that I needed to spend more time at home. So instead of doing the 10 to 15 engagements, I only did 3 a month all of spring. And then it slowed down in summer. And that was a really crucial time for my family where I just got home and I said, okay, I got to serve them. And I became a servant leader that year. I wrote The Carpenter after that because I wasn't the carpenter. I wasn't serving. I was out there speaking on leadership, but I wasn't talking about servant leadership. And it's a good thing because I wasn't living it. So I spent a lot of time at home, served my wife, served my kids, hardest year of my life. And I always tell people I wanted a different team at the time because I realized that, I kept on thinking like, what's wrong with these people? They should be self-starters. Why can't they do things that they should be doing? But at the end of the season, at the end of the year, I realized I didn't need a different team. I needed to become a better leader. And as I became a better leader, my team improved. So that began this journey of investing more in my family and relationships. My marriage got stronger. I took less speaking engagements. And so I blended all. Now it's a rhythm. Might have a few busy months, but then it slows down a little bit. My son is a tennis player. He was at IMG this year, so that made it easier to go travel. My daughter was a freshman in college, so I traveled a lot more this year. But now the summer's coming up. We're going to spend a lot of time together this summer as a family. So you find this rhythm between family, work. When I'm writing a book, I'm not around a lot. I'm writing a book. There's a season for everything. So what I tell people is you're not going to find balance in every day. The key is to find balance in the course of your year through the rhythm of the seasons of the work you're doing. But you do have to schedule those seasons. You have to make time for your family as part of the balance in the course of the year. Because if you don't, it's not going to happen.
He is John Gordon, the author of The Power of Positive Leadership. John, on this podcast, and you mentioned this, you're a learner. You're a listener. You're taking prayer walks. Listening to God, speaking to God. So I ask this of every guest on the podcast as we close here. What is God teaching you right now?
God is teaching me right now to abide more in Him, to completely trust Him, to not believe the lie that the enemy tells, because the enemy can convince you of the lie and make you worry and make you more fearful than you've ever been in your life. But to really, truly trust in God, that He has a plan for my life, and then He also has a plan for my kids' lives, my children. What are they going to do when they're older? What is my son going to do? Where is he going to go to college? So it's trusting that God has a plan for their life. He has a plan for my life. And then to really spend more time in a relationship with Him, to not be so busy with everything I'm doing, and to not make time for the relationship that truly matters most. So my word for the year, I picked the word still. And so still is my word, to find that stillness, to connect more with Him.
It's a great word, still. It's something we can all use in our lives at some point or another. Listen, this has been so great. John, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. And honestly, you've made such a giant impact on my life just in the past few years. I just want to personally thank you as well for that. So thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast.
Thanks, Jason. I really appreciate the work that you do too. It's really exciting to see that you take the leap of faith that you took to do this work, to share this message. Your podcast, by the way, I've been listening, is awesome. I mean, off the charts.
Thank you.
Doing incredible. So again, thanks for the work that you're doing, and we're on this journey together. So I'm excited about being teammates.
All right, and that was John Gordon, author and speaker. His latest book, The Power of Positive Leadership, is available everywhere from Amazon to wherever you can buy books. John was really great. I love his story, and a husband, a father of 2, and just continues to pour into not only so many other people's lives, but my life as well, with his simple principles of loving and serving and caring. We welcome in right now Raymond St. Martin. He is the Director of Digital and Media with Pro Athletes Outreach, and of course here with Sports Spectrum. Raymond, what did you think of John Gordon and his interview?
I thought it was great. I thought, man, just when you hear him speak, you you wouldn't really think he accomplished as much as he's accomplished in his life. And when he said he writes a book in, what was it?
3.5 weeks.
3.5 weeks. I mean, come on, man. Like, I've had a book in me for 3.5 decades.
Right.
And I haven't been able to get like more than 2 paragraphs out. It's insane. But as I was, when I listened to these podcasts and I listened to our guests, I always try to listen for like, what can I take away from this? Like, what's my takeaway from what John's saying? And I think I really, really resonated around the idea of his prayer walk. Mm-hmm. I think, I'm not going to probably ever write a book in 3.5 weeks, but as a creative person, I feel like sometimes I get a lot of angst in my life because you're called on to be creative, and then there's a process to get that creativity out. And then there's so many factors going around. And when I get in my head and I feel like, and I like make myself the driver, I think things they just don't work as well. And I think getting out when you're in that creative season, or when I'm in that creative season, getting out and taking a walk. I mean, we're in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, surrounded by the Rocky Mountains. We have walking paths all around us. And sometimes I'll go out there and, walk just to stay healthy. But I think I want to add that to my life, Jason. I think I want to start doing that prayer walk every day, just taking, 20, 30 minutes and just connecting with God, even beyond my morning meditation and reading. I think getting out and actively engaging with him in prayer every day is something I'm going to add to my life. So that's what I took away from that. I thought that was just something that it's just going to make me better. It's going to make more connected to God as I'm doing, and we are doing his work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that was interesting to me is when I was talking to him, I didn't know about the prayer walk. And I've known John for a couple years now. We've had long conversations on the phone before our interview. I feel like I've read all of his books and done enough research with him to know all about and I didn't know anything about this prayer walk. And so when he mentioned it, I wanted him to kind of explain it more. It was kind of almost a throwaway answer. I take these prayer walks and I come up with the book idea, and then I write. It was like, wait a minute. Tell me more about these prayer walks, because when you hear it, and it's not the most, innovative idea you've ever heard. It's literally just going for a walk with God. But I think so much of us are caught up in the busyness of life, and a lot of us are doing really great things, especially in the ministry world, for the Lord, but we still forget to just be still and take a moment to take a walk, clear our minds. Maybe it's listening to worship music. Maybe it's just getting in one with nature and kind of looking around and seeing, what's happening. But it's really just this quiet time. And we talk about quiet times and prayer closets and things like that in our house, but actually getting out and actively walking around and just kind of clearing your mind a little bit. Man, I'm going to take advantage of that too, Raymond. Definitely.
I think, as a culture, we're becoming so concerned with our 10,000 steps a day and our Fitbits and our Apple apps. Yeah. Because think about our physical health. But if that prayer walk is combining our physical health with our spiritual health, like we're feeding the soul, we're connecting to our Creator. And then we're coming in to do our work, and we're asking him along the way, like, what do you have of me today? What are you saying for me today? What do you want me to bring to light today, Father? What can I do when I get in and when I walk through that door again? What is the next thing that you want me to do? And you come in and you just start serving right away from that spot of connection. And I don't know. I think I'm just going to do that. Like right now, Jason, I'm going to leave right now. I'm going to go on my prayer walk. You press pause, and let's come back and finish this in 20 minutes. See what happens.
Man. Exactly. Let's just see what God wants to do. No, you're right. And I think that's the thing is, we talk about, and I mentioned this in another podcast about just how we start our day. And I think this is a great thing to do middle of the day, which I've done before after finishing up a long day at ESPN. But I've also done it first thing in the morning a couple years ago. And I didn't call it a prayer walk. I called it exercise in the morning. But when you think about it, at 5:30 in the morning, you get up, the very first thing you do is you go out and you walk around or take a jog around the area and get out. And especially in the summertime when it's beautiful out, that is an amazing time to just clear your mind, and it's quiet outside. The busyness hasn't started. There aren't any cars on the roads. You hear the birds chirping, and it's just this one moment where you really you have to yourself, because the rest of the day is just coming at you. And I'm with you, man. Let's just stop this podcast recording right now. Let's just go take a walk.
Yeah, I'm going to send you your prayer bit in the mail, and we're going to have a competition.
I'm in. 10,000 steps. Here we go. All right, Raymond, thank you so much for being here. And listen, just as a reminder to everybody, sportspectrum.com is the place where all things Sports Spectrum live. You can get all of the podcasts there. You can subscribe and partner with us on Sports Spectrum and be a part of everything that we're doing in this ministry. And we give you daily devotionals. Another great way to connect with the Lord first thing in the morning. It goes out at 6 a.m. and it's really awesome to just be able to spend 30 seconds to a minute. They aren't very long, and just get in with these devotionals on sportspectrum.com. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast, and we will see you next time. Boom.